Okay, welcome you all. On behalf of ICS, let me invite Dr. Jae-in and John to speak on. Okay, sorry. I just get confused. Jojin B. Joy. He will speak on new southern policy of South Korea, and especially how South Korea situates India in this policy. Before going to the details, let me give a brief introduction to the presenter. Dr. Jojin M. John is presently a research fellow at the Indian Council of World Affairs. He has also been associated with Institute of Chinese Studies as a visiting associate fellow, and then he has visited South Korea, and he has some field visit there. So he will give lots of input about the new initiative that the Korean government has announced and how India figures into this process. So over to you, Jojin.
Thank you, Dr. Shamsar. It's a pleasure to be back to ICS, and also thank everybody for coming from really chilly afternoon. What I try to do here is to give a synoptic view of the India-Korea relations, broadly taking a review, and also try to put it in context with what the South Koreans call the new Southern policy, which is a new initiative to include or elevate India and the ASEAN, not just India but also ASEAN, with the South Korean foreign policy and implications for India-Korea relations. So, in a brief, if one were to look at India-Korea relations in the recent years, one could see that the relations have become evolved to become a comprehensive and multidimensional in nature. And one of the one way to look at the development, the expansion of the development, is to look at the upgradation of the labels that has been put to place to define the relationship. In 2004, it was defined as a cooperative partnership. In 2010, it was upgraded to a strategic partnership, and in 2015, it upgraded to special strategic partnership. It's a theoretically intriguing question what these actually means, but it is suffice to say that the rhetoric of, or putting the narrative of strategic partnership, special strategic partnership, is not just about the change in the narrative, but also the form and the content of the relationship. Well, one can go on try to understand what actually it means, but well, I will not try to do that. But in doing so, it's important to acknowledge that we are, in terms of bilateral relations, there's a new context emerging, and that's what I try to highlight in the presentation. And these two contexts is primarily for two reasons, particularly an elevation of India's status in the Korean foreign policy that is associated with what they call the new Southern policy, and also the regional context, which was not really figured in India-Korea relations for a long time, and it was not really figured in the bilateral context. So in that perspective, I thought I'll give an emphasis to the context rather than the content of the relationship. So from a theoretical perspective, when we talk about bilateral relations, we really don't try to theorize what actually bilateral relationship is all about. So to put it in terms of a framework to think about it, one can think about bilateral relationship in terms of interaction between three different kinds of spaces. Interaction between India, Korea as interaction between India-Korea bilateral relations as an interaction between two geopolitical spaces, or you can think about in terms of India-Korea relations as interaction between two geo-economic spaces, or think about in terms of two geo-cultural spaces. So, why to think about it's important is because the actors in each relationship are different. I mean, if you look at geopolitical, the state takes the predominance in terms of the interaction. But if you think about in the geo-economic interactions, the role of the state is there, but it's minimal. I mean, its role is big. I mean, if the context is of a market of context, then it's the enterprises which take the role. So the role of the state becomes or that of a facilitator rather than a key agent of a relationship. But if you take the geo-cultural interaction, if you think about it in that terms, the role of the state becomes very minimal. And it also becomes, not even, sometimes it does not become even the facilitator. Its role is very minimal. So sometimes we don't, in terms of thinking about bilateral relations, we don't really appreciate other actors in this framework. We normally go on talking about the interstate relationship, rather without giving much emphasis to the other actors. So, but what I try to do here, I try to look into the two India-Korea relationship as the engagement between the two spaces, I mean geo-economic and geopolitical spaces, and trying to think more from the state perspective. So to do so, what I try to do is to give you a brief, this would be the outline of my presentation. Well, I give a brief background. I think not many people are so familiar to the India-Korea relations context. I'll give you a synaptic view of the history of the relationship, and also what I try to do is to give you a review of the relationship under what we call the special strategic partnership, which is like the development in the last 5 years. And then I try to contextualize the new context, what I try to argue, and then locate the new southern policy in the Korean foreign policy context, and try to figure out the opportunities and challenges and its implication for India-Korea relations. Well, the modern relationship between India and Korea, particularly after it began with the Indian engagement in the Korean Peninsula in the 1950s, I mean, in the context of the Korean War, and before the Korean War, particularly the questions of the Korean question, and particularly after the division of the Korean Peninsula at the end of the Second World War. So the role one could see, I mean, well, actually, in diplomatic history, I mean, one could argue that the role that India played in terms of the Korean Peninsula issue and the Korean War is underappreciated. It's only very recently that people try to appreciate the role that India played in terms of bringing an end to the Korean War, and also the role that India played in terms of as a communicator between the two blocs. So the role that India played also in terms of resolving the problems of the prisoners of war, and also the role that India played in terms of the United Nations Commission on settling the Korean issue. And it's also considered, it can be considered in terms of a diplomatic entrepreneurship on the part of India to play, and perhaps the first the occasion where the Indian diplomats were playing an important role in the international arena. But it was more of an Indian engagement to the Korean Peninsula. It was not, there was nothing bilateral about it, because and from the South Korean side, it was seen, the India's role was seen with very was not very welcome. It was seen as problematic, and because the Korean leadership saw the role of India that it played was not in terms of the non-alignment framework, but more in terms of an agent of socialism and the communism. So it was a deep-seated skepticism, and it's also framed the Korean relations during the Cold War period. The one way to characterize the relationship is a strategic estrangement, and there are a couple of reasons. The context was the bipolar Cold War context, and also deep-seated mistrust from India about and its intentions from among the Korean elites, and also, well, the different kinds of economic models that the both countries adopted. The Koreans adopted what they call the export industrialization model, but India adopted the import substitution model, which is two different kinds which were not figured out. There was little context for engagement. And also, the Korea adopted something called the the One Korea policy. It's like what the Chinese do. It's like if you have a relationship, a diplomatic relationship with North Korea, then the South Koreans won't engage in a diplomatic relationship. And that changed in the 1970s, in context in which the two countries established relationship, diplomatic relationship in 1973, and it's along with North Korea. So there was not much of engagement in terms of economically or politically between the two countries, and that changed after the end of the Cold War. So the relationship between India and Korea that we see is one can actually trace in the end of the Cold War period, and the context that facilitated what would be characterized into three convergence. I mean, one could actually identify it as a geopolitical convergence. So in a way, the ideological problem that exists between the two countries vanished at a point of time, and the economic structures, particularly the liberalization model, liberalization of the Indian economy, and also on the Korean side, what you have at that point of time is the expansion of the globalization phase of the Korean economy, and also a foreign policy orientation. I mean, let's say it's the look east, and also what the Koreans call the globalizing of Korean foreign policy, or globalization approach to the Korean foreign policy created what you call a context for the engagement. And well, that's also sort of end the India's equidistance policy, which it kept towards the Korean Peninsula between the two Koreas, keeping an equal status to North Korea and South Korea till the 1990s. That did change. So, and also what you see is the coming of the Korean chaebols, or the big conglomerates to the Indian market. So in a way, the Korean engagement to India at that point of time was more driven by the Korean business enterprises rather than the government. So it was, let's say, the market-driven process that brought to the India-Korea relations. So in 2010, the relationship between the two countries was upgraded to what they call the strategic partnership. And it's important to see the context in which this came into being. Well, it's also, well, one of the thing that from a Korean perspective, that the image of India and Korea was very, I mean, it was seen through what they call the re-Orientalist perspective, because I mean, during the Cold War period and later on, one of the major ideological framework which created the Korean imagination or the worldview is the developmentalism and the discourses of anti-communism. So developmentalism, the Korea was trying to catch up, and the catching up to the West. So in that framework, the image of India was seen to be a very poor. So it was not attractive for the Koreans in terms of engaging, and it's interesting to see anecdotally that if you were to talk to a Korean in the 1990s, or even in the early 2000s, I mean, they will ask you what is the GDP or GDP per capita of your country. So then accordingly they will frame how to engage with the country or talk to you. So this was very prevalent, and this was prevalent even at least by 1997 till the end of till the financial crisis, which understood that the catching up is not is an ongoing process. So the Korean perception of India changed in 2000. Is also associated with the growing image of India in international context, particularly after the Pokhran test, and also associated with the Indo-US nuclear deal. And also, well, particularly from an economic perspective, it's the coinage of the BRICS and the articulation of India as an emerging economy and the image of the rising. So that changed the image that the Koreans had of India. So they started looking at and seeing, and also from an Indian perspective, they started looking at Korea as an important source of technology and capital. So this change in image that brought see both countries as what you call strategic actors in international relations, so that in a way articulated into what you call the strategic partnership. So what the important aspect of the relationship, you see a diversification and expansion of the relationship. Before it was a very very narrow economic relationship, got expanded into other spaces, including defense, technology, education, all kinds of fields. got into the agenda of the relationship. And in 2015, the relationship got upgraded to what they call the special strategic partnership. And it was during the Prime Minister Modi's visit to Korea in July 2015. And one can actually make a distinction between the approach in this particular period, because the emphasis was to, and the Indian side seeing the Korea as an important factor in terms of what they call the developmental project, which was unveiling in India, at least in terms of narrative, about the Korea as a model partnership partner for India's say domestic developmental project, whether that's Skill India or Make in India, so the range of programs. So which the Korean developmental model seems to be an interesting model, and also a model that could be learned, and also an important partner. And so a number of initiatives that have been articulated and also put in place during this particular frame of the relationship. So if you were to look at the relationship of the particular period, I mean, this is the period where you will see an intensification in terms of political and institutional consolidation. The bilateral relationship got upgraded to what you call the 2+2, well, at the vice ministerial level, and also, well, if you look from 2015, you see around 10 ministerial delegations from both sides across, and also defense and security cooperation also got expanded. I mean, there are two elements to defense and the defense and security cooperation. The one side of that is more about the co-production of defense and basically defense manufacturing cooperation. So in that regard, I mean, there's an MOU, or not just an MOU. There are initiatives in initiative like joint ship production for the Indian Navy. It's also been in negotiation stages, and also one of the flagship the project India-Korea defense co-production is the engagement between Samsung Techman, which is a Korean defense manufacturer, and L&T, which joined together to produce the K9 Vajra harvesters, which was and it's also been identified and be projected as the key project, a key initiative under the Make in India defense program, whereby, well, 10 or 9 these harvesters will be made in Korea. The rest all will be around 90 of them will be produced in the L&D facility in Pune. So this is, and it's also the largest the private defense project that the MOD has given to public company. And the other, and also there is also a number of joint exercises, particularly within the Coast Guard, and also Navy has been engaging for the last couple of, at least for the last 3 years. And infrastructure is another area whereby the relationship is going forward. The one important aspect is the Korean government has given a 9 billion concessional loan and to exclusively for the smart city projects, and also 1 billion ODA. So, well, and also to have this ODA to come into India, because the Indian ODA law has to be rewritten, because previously we had a law which suggested that non-G7 ODAs were not accepted, bilateral loans were not accepted to India. So this has changed to accommodate the Korean ODA. And also the maritime sector is also another important sector whereby the Korea-India relations becoming partner. And the key aspect is the India-Korea Maritime Summit, which flagged Korea as a partner country. And this is more in terms of the port-led development, because the Korean maritime and the shipbuilding sector is one of the most competitive in the world. So it's well, if you look at the trade, I mean, and so India Korea also signed what we call the comprehensive economic partnership in 2009, which came into force in 2010, and it was the first country. Korea was the first OECD country which signed the FTA with India. So if you look at the trade pattern, I mean, it was stagnated in the in the middle of the 2010s, and now, well, in 2000 the trade reached to the early, the 2011 stage. So one of the things that both countries been doing in the 2015, because I mean to improve the utility rate of the FTA, and also to expand and to deepen the scope of the free trade agreement, they decided to further liberalize the trade regime between the two countries. But there are a lot of issues. I mean, if you look at the trade pattern, I mean, as the trade increases, the deficit also. So this has become an important concern for particularly the business, and if you talk to FICCI and all, they tell you a different story about it. So they say there's not much scope in terms of India-Korea relations, and we should focus on investment rather than trade, because the important fact is that the Korean industries are very competitive, and it's very difficult for Indian products to capture the Korean market. And also, it's also one of the things that we talk about when it comes to India-Korea relations is the general tagline that goes around: that Korea has the hardware and India has the software. But if you look at so there's a win-win situation, but actually that's not really the story. I mean, if you look at it, the Indian IT service industry has very minimal role, or they couldn't even capture the Korean market. It's also tell you something about the Indian and the Korean service market, the nature in which it's very close, and it's very difficult to get into the Korean. And also, that will also tell you the situation whereby why Indian pharmaceutical products could not get into the Korean market. So these are important issues. And also, the SEPA is not just about trade in goods, but also trade in services. But that's not really being talked about. It's an issue that need to be taken up, because that's where India has the comparative advantage. And if somebody who follows the RCEP negotiations and the things, because everybody is ganging up against India in terms of not to have the service market open. So this is an important issue that's also with Korea. And if you look at the investment part in terms of strategic partnership, or the special strategic partnership, in 2000 till 2012, there was a fiasco in terms of the post-war, and this was becoming a psychological barrier for the Korean investors to come and invest in India. And if you look at the trend in the last couple of years, this has changed in terms of there's a positive trend in terms of Korean investment in India, and there's a range of investment that's newly announced. And also, an important aspect to that is the change in nature of the investment. I mean, the Koreans are now becoming more interested in joint ventures, and if anybody follow the Korean investment in India, it's not just in India but all over the world. The Koreans prefer to have wholly owned enterprises. They prefer not to get into joint ventures. So this trend is changing in a way that the Koreans are increasingly becoming more interested in joint ventures, and also the Korean infrastructure companies are becoming increasing their footprint in India. And also there's also collaboration in third countries, and to facilitate the investment sector, two mechanisms has been instituted: the Korea Plus, which work closely with the Ministry of Commerce and the Prime Minister's office, which becomes the first point for the Korean investors to and to address their issues. And the second is the Future Strategic Group, which takes into account of the new partnership in terms of the fourth industrial the new technology industries. And another important dynamics of the relations is what you call the para-diplomacy, because I mean, the increasing role of the state governments, the Indian state governments, in terms of India-Korea relations, because increasingly you see a lot of the state government led by the chief ministers going to Korea, and because it's a very new phenomenon. It's in the last, and also the Korean government, Korea is also reciprocated in the way they started focusing on very few. They started taking account of the federal structure more seriously and try to, and this is also the lesson that they learned out of the positive experience that they have. So you find the Korean investment is going more focused on Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Gujarat, in these states. And this is a new dynamics, and this is becoming a new actor in terms of the bilateral relationship. Well, let me now focus on what I call in the beginning what I call the new context. I mean, the new context. It's been out there for quite some time because, and it was articulated very clearly during President Moon's visit to India in 2018. And I call it the new context primarily because of two factors, particularly first they elevate the prominence of India in the Korean foreign policy. So if you look at the Korean foreign policy, they primarily focus on 4 countries, and the geographical scope of the foreign policy is Northeast Asia. So over the last 2 years, you find the Korean government and also think tanks articulating the role of India and expanding relationship with India and ASEAN, and also this was articulated even before the President Moon became assumed office in 2017. It was manifested in his election manifesto, and also soon after he became the president, he sent a special envoy to India. It was the first time that a special envoy was sent to India. Before they used to send it to all the big 4 partners, which is Japan, China, Russia, and the United States. So this was mostly the Korean foreign policy. The agenda was constituted of. And it's also the other aspect is the regional dynamics, which is becoming a more or an important variable in India-Korea relations. If you look at the joint visions over the last couple of years, you will see a little element of it, but you will not find anything concrete about it. So if you think about India-Korea relations over the last 20 years, it was more focused on the interaction of the geo-economic space, whereby it was the purely an economic agenda which dominated the bilateral relationship, and you will not find much about the regional aspect of. But interestingly, for the first time, a shared regional vision was articulated, which called in a way for a peaceful, stable, secure, free, open, inclusive, rule-based region. Well, if you go through this vision, it's in a way articulates India's Indo-Pacific vision. Well, but interestingly, the Korean side was hesitant to accept the concept of Indo-Pacific, but in a way acknowledging it's also as a vision that they also articulate. And both countries were also agreed to have a third country partnership in third country, particularly looking at expanding the possibility of having regional partnership, and the capacity building in Afghanistan was identified as the initial project. This in a way, this new focus on India was articulated what they call the new Southern policy, which included, which in a way expanded to push the Korean diplomatic horizons beyond the great powers and also beyond the Northeast Asian region, focusing on ASEAN and India. Well, it also highlights, in a way, the second wave of India in Korea. The first wave one could see in the 1990s, in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, where the Korean, which was more a business-driven wave in Korea, which pushed many of the Korean companies to come to India. But now you see the government taking a lot of interest in terms of approaching to India. And this is very much fit with the President Moon Jae-in's foreign policy framework, where he articulated what he called the Northeast Asia Plus community, which in a way, the plus includes India. The Northeast Asia was the framework in which Korea used to think about its foreign policy, but the plus includes India and ASEAN, elevating these two entities to the status of the great or the big four countries. And also it's included what they call the new northern policy and the new southern policy. If in the Korean foreign policy framework, the other two elements, or the new northern policy or the Northeast Asia community platform, is to be very consistent over the last couple of years, or at least for the last 15 or the 3 administrations in different names. The new southern policy is a new element to it, which articulates peace and prosperity. The Koreans are very cautious about articulating a security frame, but in a way looking at peace more generally. So they are very cautious in terms of articulating the new southern policy, or any policy for that matter, as a security content to it. So if one were to look at the key drivers or the context in which this policy emerged, the key driver is the China factor. In a way, and in particular the Chinese assertiveness over the last 2 years, particularly after the THAAD, or the American defense, the missile defense installment in Korea in 2016. And since its diplomatic normalization with China in 1992, the China and the South Korean economic relationship was expanded to the extent that the South Korea was, in a way, become very dependent in terms of it's dependent on China for economic growth. And was seen as an opportunity. But it's not longer the case, in a way that the Koreans don't see China as an economic opportunity, but increasingly seen as a competitor. And this was articulated in so many instances where, in the THAAD context, it was more articulated, whereby China imposed an informal sanctions on Korea, selectively, and also the Chinese companies are becoming more competitive to Korea, not only in the Chinese market but also the international market. And the other important fact is the regional factor, which includes the U.S.-China competition, the uncertainty of the U.S. role in Asia, and in a way, the Koreans were also in thinking in terms of reducing its dependency on Washington. And it's also, Koreans are very cautious in terms of if you look at the Korean regional policy, it's more ambiguous in nature, because they don't want to put themselves in a situation whereby to choose between China or United States. That's not the kind of choice that they can afford to. So one of the major aspects, there's an economic imperative to the New Southern policy, and also a geopolitical dimension to the New Southern policy. So in a way, the New Southern policy, one could think in terms of as a diversification, looking for a new China, which is in a way new China in terms of a new source of economic growth, and also diversification. It's like a China plus strategy. If you look at it, it's a mid to long term vision, in a way that you don't really see a clear cut vision in terms of projects. What is it not? And it's so far it's been like almost one year and a half. it's in place, and it's more emphasis on institutionalizing Korea's approach to Southeast Asia and India in particular, looking at building knowledge infrastructure and human resources in terms of building new institutions to approach and to know and learn about India, and also, and if you see over the last 1 year at least, I mean, the flooding of Korean think tanks to India, it's also an indication whereby the increasing focus, and before there was no think tank which in Korea which had any India expert, so the situation is changing, which I also see telling an indication whereby the Koreans are started focusing India seriously compared to the past. Well, and also they have instituted what they call the Presidential Committee on New Southern Policy, which is directly coordinated by the President's economic advisor, and which is coordinating between 10 departments of the Korean government. So in a way, it's a broad strategy, and but try to streamline the Korean approach to India. But if you look at the strategy in particular, what you see is geo-economic domination and ambiguity in terms of geopolitical dimension, but which forces one to think that New Southern policy is nothing more than an external economic policy. Well, if one were to think about opportunities and challenges in terms of bilateral relations, there's a shared regional context which, or a vision which is articulated, but it's not yet clear what this, or the shared wish or interest which will be leads to. But also you have a similar view of the emerging order, which is broad, what you call the inclusive, open architecture that both countries wanted to have. And what you have is a geo-economic context, which is also associated with the emergence of new growth centers, in a way also shifting away from the Northeast Asia to the Southeast Asia and towards the Indian Ocean region. That's a context that we have, but there are a range of, a number of challenges, because the main challenges between India and Korea, in particularly in geopolitical matters, is a perceptual gap or a knowledge gap between each other's vision about approaches to each other, and also each other's perspective. To give an instance, the Koreans understood India's Indo-Pacific as they associated with Quad. That's the way they think about the Indian approach to, or Indian interpretation of, or Indian perspective on Indo-Pacific. So these perceptual gaps are important. These are major challenges for the bilateral relationship. And institutional consolidation and follow-up is becoming a big hurdle in terms of the bilateral relationship, to the extent that in every this bilateral summit, you have this range of MOUs being signed, but what you see is none of them are being followed up. So this becomes a bureaucratic process in which the bilateral relationship gets stuck up in the bureaucratic structures. But in a way, an India-Korea relationship, if you look at generally, it's more bureaucratic in nature compared to political. So if you wanted to take up these the relationship forward, you need to take it to elevate it to political, need to inject a political status to the relationship rather than it letting it at the bureaucratic level. And in the past, India-Korea relationship was more of a transactional in nature. It was the business transaction that was let's say, defined major aspect of the relationship. It was not relational in nature, and there was no. It was not seen in the general aspect of, in terms of the image of the engagement with the two countries. So the cultural aspect or the perceptual aspect has not been much articulated. That's also becoming an important change, and that's also changing slowly. And also, from an Indian perspective, we have not been focusing much on these middle power countries. Our focus entirely has been on great powers. So, we don't take these small countries or the medium range countries very seriously. So, it's also becoming a challenge in terms of taking the relationship with middle power countries like Korea forward. So, in conclusion, what I would say is the relationship between India and Korea acquired momentum in the new context. However, the strategic partnership between India and Korea is a work in progress and currently operating below its potential. It seems that the regional outlook for India-Korea relationship is emerging in a context of a new reality in the region. But the partnership on this direction is yet to evolve. The strategic imperative in India-Korea relations so far has been largely attributed to economic and developmental partnership. The emerging context of the relation implies strategic underpinning to the regional and systemic aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jojin. Very informative presentation. When you were making presentation, I was a bit curious to know that whether this new initiative is departure from New Asia Initiative or there is some continuity, there is some consistency. That one thing that was in my mind. And secondly, when you discussed about India-Korea relationship, that you have highlighted the strategic aspect. And again, you have discussed the cultural as well as economic aspect. I was, when you came to the economic part, the story of India-Japan relations seems very similar to India-Korea relations, where India signed CEPA with Japan in 2000. Of course, it signed content, but it came into effect in 2011. It gave new momentum to the bilateral engagement, and the bilateral trade volume increased substantially. But in your slide, what I found here that you have started the economic, the counting bilateral trade volume from 2010 onwards. What was the situation before 2010, before the economic partnership agreement? Of course, as you have highlighted, that the trade balance is heavily in, it was in Korea's favor, but after CEPA, it has gone in Korea's favor, Korea's advantage, and this is like growing. The balances, this balance continues to grow. Now, but you didn't mention the reason why the balance is growing, and what is the way forward to bridge the deficit. So that, if you could dwell upon, then I will open the floor for discussion. We'll start with
Yes.
We'll have to take more questions.
No, I'll just deal with these two questions. One of the important aspects when it comes to Korean foreign policy, I think now it's also become part of every country, part of the foreign policy of almost every country, that you have these new taglines coming, right? So when you have a new government, you have a new terminology to define foreign policy. So acties, and the look is becoming acties. So, well, of course, the narrative has its own importance. But important about the New Asia policy was not really an India-focused policy. It was a general emphasis on the re-engagement with Asia. That was the motivation behind it. And it was not really a focus on Southeast Asia or for that matter on India. But if you look at the development, it was more focused on the Middle East and also on Central Asia. That was the more attention of the. So, but of course, I mean, there is a continuation in terms of the approach to Southeast Asia and South Asia. But the important aspect of New Southern policy is that a special attention is being given to India and Southeast Asia, and this was not there in the Korean foreign policy agenda before, and this is something new about it. And also the institutional consolidation of of this particular foreign policy beyond the rhetoric, and that's happening for the first time. And with respect to the balance of the trade before, it was quite low before the SEPA. But the SEPA show a rapid increase in terms of the trade volume. But also it got stagnated in the 2013 and 14, and it's not a phenomenon which is just particular to India, Korea, but also around the world, and particularly after the financial crisis. But the problem of the balance is it's because of the Korean products are very competitive, and also the Indian comparative advantage that we have is particularly in the service sector, which has limited access to the Korean market, and this is something that we need to be problem. And also, I think trade the deficit will not be a problem if it's commensurated by FDI, which will add value to the economy. Because that's one of the things that the industry sector articulated. We prefer to have a Hyundai type of investment rather than a Samsung type of investment, which does not add value to the economy, but because actually the processes that happen is just assembly, and the spillover effect of that kind of FDI is very less compared to the investment which the Hyundai or the other the manufacturing companies they make in India.
So, any question? Yeah, Beam.
Yeah, thank you, Jojin, for your presentation. My question is with regard to a lot of these policies, vis-a-vis like we in India, we have Look East policy, Act East policy. Taiwan has its own version of new southbound policy. We have Korea with a new south policy. So I think sometimes when international relations or nations really do play their roles. So I do sometimes tend to think that in East Asia, being China a big factor in the room, element in the room, sometimes we tend to feel that it's fatigue, some kind of policies. Every country has its own policy, but at the same time, what are you addressing it? Is it real politics, or are you trying to, really, whether you want to discuss China or not? So how far, because actually this question, also comes from yesterday's interaction with the Kino delegation, that they were saying that China is a big, elephant in the room, so we need to address that issue. So again, following from that, and today your presentation you talk about the South Pole. So how do you see really will this work out, especially vis-a-vis India? Because you just said again, Samsung kind of investment doesn't help, but Hyundai kind of investments you will really help. But with this increasing technological innovation, you can also see the layers of will that spillover really help, whether it's Hyundai or Samsung. So there are two questions here. One is the policy fatigue. How do you address this? Like different countries in Asia. And secondly, with innovation coming in, do we really see whether Hyundai kind of investment really help countries like India?
So he wants to take more questions. Yeah, go ahead please.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for your presentation. So in your presentation you...
Introduce yourself.
My name is Preksha, I'm from JNU. Okay. So in your presentation you mentioned a lot about strategic partnership. Now strategic partnership as an IR concept does not have a definite definition. So during the course of your research, did you find that India's definition of strategic partnership is different to Korea's definition of strategic partnership? That's my question number one. The second question is, also in your opinion, the difference between strategic partnership and special strategic partnership, is it actually significant, or is it only a symbolic upgrade of partnership?
What is the special in this special? So yeah.
Okay, the policy fatigue. There's an element of cliche in all these policies. They say you find that Taiwan, I think 3 years before they introduce a New Southern policy, the Koreans introducing the New Southern policy. I think the Japanese does not come up with any these kinds of confrontation. I think it's very. I mean, it's also part of the problem, part of the problem, because I mean, you don't really find sometimes you don't really find much in terms of substance. It's just the cover that changes. I mean, it's like the old wine, the new water, in a way. Well, as you suggested, the China is an important factor in terms of particularly the Koreans and the Japanese, and also the Taiwanese for the matter, their the approach to the region and also the engagement with the region. But they also are very cautious about talking about it. Because also, so in a way, I mean, I think the engagement that we see over the last 1 year, particularly from the Korean side, is to know how we understand. And it's more in terms of knowledge diplomacy rather than in terms of specific aspect in terms of how to deal with it. And so in a way, so it's more in terms of an exploratory in nature, particularly rather than in terms of concrete step in terms of how to do or what to do about it. But on the other part of the economic aspect, it's very real in terms of these policies. Is particularly from a Korean perspective, is to readdress their dependence on China, or to address, or in a way looking at it as a strategy, the China plus strategy, in terms of putting the eggs in different baskets rather than putting in just in China. So it's in a way, well, it's interesting to see that how the Korean perspective changed, because they saw their economic engagement with China as more an interdependent in nature, but suddenly they started feeling it as dependency. And this change it's been a change that, I mean, evolved over the last, in terms of perception, over the last at least for 5 years. Not before that. We don't really see that there's a great optimism in terms of Korea-China relationship, particularly the economic aspects. Well, after they saw it as an opportunity, but that has changed. That perception has changed, and also that perception has changed at the ground also, not just in terms of the governmental thinking, but also on the level of people who engages with China on a daily basis. And well, I mean, if you could allow me, I will elaborate on the experience that the Koreans had with because the Koreans don't see the Chinese not just in terms of opportunities, more increasingly seen as a competition. Because that and what the Chinese do is targeted. Can't call it sanctions, but informal kind of sanctions in all other ways, without making it official, so that to protect the Chinese industries and to give them an advantage in terms of in their competition with the Korean companies in particular. So it's a very targeted thing. So you know what you see is a rising economic nationalism in China. I don't think it's nothing new about it, but it's becoming more and more articulate, and that's the Korean perception of it. I think maybe somebody could see how the Indian engagement with China in that context. And also, well, about the what does actually strategic partnership mean? Well, it's a quite a new expression in international relations, because it's a language which is being taken from the business. Well, it was mostly used in the business circles, business literature before. So you will not find the use of strategic partnership as a concept in international relations before 1990. It was first used in the 1993 when, in the context of Brazil-China relationship, and then you find it in terms of Russia-China relationship, and then countries started picking it up. I mean, India has been, or China has been very liberal in terms of using strategic partnership. China has around 70 to 80 strategic partnership. India is a little more selective in terms of doing it. So in a way that we have around 30 strategic partnership, and starting with South Africa in 1998, and well, with the France, European Union, but we have been selective in terms of calling relationship as strategic partnership. But well, if you look at the evolution of the language, what you see is it is to articulate a new form, a narrative to interstate relationship in the post-Cold War context. Because if you look at the use of the language, it is to dissociate interstate relationship, what used to be associated with the then dominant form as the alliances. So the relationship, the strategic partnership, in a sense, taking from the business literature, articulated an inclusive interstate relationship, which means to say that if you have a relationship with one country, it does not mean to say that you cannot have a relationship with other country. So it's in a way a language which articulates an alternative alternative interstate relationship, but also, and it's not a relationship which is articulated based on the image of an enemy. So the idea of an interstate relationship which was during the Cold War period associated with enemy and friend is no longer the case. And also you find another aspect to the relationship is of the strategic partnership relationship is it was more domestically driven. So, but many people do articulate strategic partnership as alliances. But if you read carefully about the official use of the language, you will not. It is much broad based. So it's not particularly associated with anything strategic, in which we traditionally understood it as. So that's. But anyway, it's also the language is used very very generally in that sense. But I think in Indian context, one can make actually a case where this is a diplomatic language innovation in terms of to articulate India's relationship with the rest of the world, particularly interstate relationship in a new context. Well, and also with respect to the change in the language with respect to strategic partnership to special strategic partnership, I think that's more of a narrative change. And well, it is to give a twist to it is like the change in, say, look east to act east policy. But I also think that it is to give an emphasis and to look it as more special. But I don't know exactly why the government used it as special, but I don't have an answer to that. Thank you.
Okay, so next round of question. Yeah, let me ask. Let's start with. Yeah, introduce yourself.
I am Vishek Ranjan from Delhi University. So my question is basically India's foreign policy these days is more of investment-seeking foreign policy. They seek investment, but Korean economy itself is facing many problems like unemployment, household debts. So in future, will South Korea be able to invest more in India? And second, the chaebols are now not in that control of Korean state as it was under the developmental state phase of South Korea. So now the Korean chaebols itself go investing in other countries like Vietnam or Thailand. So will it further be interested to invest in India? And the second question is on labor market diaspora. The new Southern policy focuses on South Asia, but most of the workers working in South Korea are from South Asia are basically working in 3 Ds: the dirty works, the difficult works, and the dangerous works. The South Korean government has shifted that manual working from automation. They are just shifting the policy to use robots in those work. So again, these South Asian workers are getting unemployed there. And secondly, they are talking of North-South policy, means North-South better relation, North Korea and South Korea better relation. In that case, South Korean economy has need also to include the North Korean population. In that case, what will be the future of that South Asian workers working there?
Okay, so Veda?
I just had a basic question, Jojin. You mentioned very briefly in passing about this Korean development model, the Korean growth. Can you just tell us a little bit about what is the model?
Okay, I mean, just the situation of the Korean economy. Yeah, I mean, it's also in talking about even the southern policy or the north, the emphasis of President Moon Jae-in and his own people. It's in a way, it tells you something about the economic model or the reform that he wants to bring at home. It's what he calls the income-led development, which is to say a sort of not really complete market approach to economics, but to say a little bit of social. Well, they prefer not to use the word socialism in Korea, but it is to say what they call the economic democratization, which is to say that because I mean, if you look at the Korean economy, it's dominated by these big chaebol, big conglomerates, and they dominate the Korean economy. So, for example, maybe 80 or 90% of the total Korean economy is dominated by a couple of maybe 5, 6 this big chaebol. So, well, the emphasis is to diversify the economy base and also bring into to enable the real income of the people to grow. But the problem, because they cannot do it easily, because that's the problem that the Korean government is now facing in terms of implementing that problem. I mean, implementing that particular economic reform. Because I mean, if you try to restructure these Korean chaebols or try to discipline them, what you find is they escape the Korea. So there is a limit to which they can do it, but they're trying to do it in a different way, but it's not happening right now. That's one of the reasons why President Moon Jae-in's popularity is going down. But does that has an impact on the FDI flows? Well, I mean, if they try to do that income-led economic policy in Korea, it will force more Korean companies to move out, because as this policy goes, the labor cost goes up. They try to move out in one way or the other. But also with respect to your second question about the labor. Well, Korea also is one of the aging society. They face the problem. But you also find that labor laws in Korea, particularly immigration laws, are very vague. And it's well, I mean, you have lots of problems, but it's very difficult situation. Because I mean, let's say it's one of the issue which has not been really got the media attention. It's very got very limited attention, and also this most labor are from Vietnam or from say from South Asia. It's Bangladesh or Nepal or from Pakistan. There's a lot of problems in terms of when these people are not being taken care of properly. So, and also the government has failed in terms of implementing the basic labor standards. So that's a big issue of concern. And what was your other question?
The 3 Ds.
This was labor rights.
The second was the inter-Korea.
Yeah.
Intercorrelation means the Korean economy has to, South Korean economy also has to include the North Korean.
One of the motivation, and actually if you look at the unification or the agenda that was put forth by the previous government, was educating Koreans to see unification as an economic opportunity. We call it a bonanza. So which means to say that, I mean, Korea is facing all kinds of economic so the problem to the Korean economic troubles at home can be solved through a process of integration with North Korea. So that was a model which was solved by the last government, which didn't sell much. But also, many of the one of the major problems for the Korean integration to the Northeast Asian economy is North Korea. So if they could manage to keep or engage North Korea into some sort of regional economic integration, it allows the Korean investment or the Korean economy to find new sources of economic growth. And if you look at President Moon Jae-in's vision of the Northeast Asian economic integration model, which is precisely in terms of connecting South Korea to the larger Russian Far East and the northeast part of China through North Korea, and that's one of their agenda. So if that's the case, I think, well, definitely there will be a reduction in terms of the Korean FDI to the other part of the world, because they prefer to focus, because it's the culture is same, the language is same, so it's and also it's North Korea, for that matter, is an untapped economic destination. So it also gives them a greater leverage in terms of making, it's an economic opportunity. Okay, she was asking about, well, what I was referring, because I mean, if you wanted to have an economic engagement, you need to have some context in which it's possible to have, right? So if you, in the 1960s, the Koreans started adopting what they call export promotion model, in a way, as compared to what we had in India, a quite opposite model. In a way, India had an inward look, and where what the Koreans did, they started to, their economic growth was based on what they call exporting. So they started with what they call the small and medium scale industries, then they got upgraded to heavy industries, then moved into the new, or the advanced technologically based industry. So but the focus has always been to export. So that will also give you situations where to be competitive, because you force yourself to be competitive. So that's exactly the problem. One of the reasons why the Indian economy is not able to compete with, is because once you have an inward-looking focus, I mean, it's very difficult for you to increase your competitiveness with respect to the market. So, well, that's a long story cut short.
Table on the trade deficit, is that only goods trade? Or
It's good trade. Because I mean, the problem that we have with the services, we don't have the data. Very different.
Human conflict?
Well, it's very limited data that we have. Well, I don't know, I actually didn't look into it actually.
It would be interesting to see if that is added, then what would be the total balance of trade. And it would also be interesting to see that from services exports, what is our people going there? Even they can work, the tourism, and we can export even without sending people. So if we can disaggregate and see in the various modes of mode 1, mode 2, where we are, where we are good, where we are not so good, that would be interesting.
Now, my assessment about trade and services is more with the interaction with the chambers of commerce. I mean, rather, I actually didn't look into the data of it, because I mean, they were also finding, because I mean, this is based on my experience with the Indian interaction with the Indian Chamber of Commerce in Korea, because they face a lot of problems in terms of, because on paper, it's possible for Indian English teachers to go to Korea, Indian software professionals to go to Korea, but you have a range of non-tariff barriers which does not allow to have the Indians coming and teaching in Korea, because there's also cultural barriers to it, all kinds of barriers, and also visa problems. Also, that's also one of the problems faced by the IT companies, because I mean, well, as per agreement, it's okay to have put in to do servicing in Korea, but the problem is that there is an internal lobby which within Korea which work along with the different ministries, which does not allow, and the information access is very limited. And, well, of course, we have all the major IT servicing companies present in Korea, but the problem is they do their major servicing to the multinational companies which are present in Korea rather than any Korean companies. So it has been a big problem, and they also try to make it a point that this becomes an issue in terms of the bilateral negotiations. But it's a very difficult, as you know, to put in place.
So any more question? Since there is no question from the floor, let me thank Dr. Jojin V. John for presenting his views on this issue, and of course we got enlightened on these aspects. Thank you very much for this presentation indeed.